Welcome and thank you for tuning in. Today, I'm very excited to be speaking with Scott Kupor, the Director of the Office of Personnel Management. Director Kupor, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Drew, for having me. Appreciate it.
So we're here to discuss some new training opportunities that OPM has just rolled out. These are specifically for senior executives and senior level federal employees. So just to start out, can you talk about where the need for these new training programs came from, what existed previously, and what are you kind of hoping will change here?
Yeah. So the reason we designed this new program is the old program was known as FEI, and we made a decision earlier in the year to discontinue that program. The main reason for that was the program was very good. I would say it was lacking in a couple areas. One was just it literally had a physical campus to it, so it required people to be away from office for several days in order to do it, and it was all kind of in-person training. We spent in the last year, we spent about $22 million in order to get people through that training. And we only got about a third of the SES group through it just because of the cost, unfortunately, was prohibitive, both in terms of dollars as well as just people's time. The second thing was we felt like the curriculum could use a little bit of an update. And so there's some commonality, obviously, between kind of what we had before and what we have now. But this enables us to do this, number one, at a much lower cost to make it obviously, remote and accessible to people in a self-paced environment. And then importantly, to be able to add some additional areas that we thought kind of the SES team could benefit from.
So you've talked about this being, in your words, high impact, directly relevant training rather
Yeah.
than more generalized management training. And you kind of alluded to that in your answer there, but can you talk about what makes this training more specific or more tailored and kind of more of the development of that?
Yeah, we really try to design it with the principle of, okay, like what do we want the SES team to do in their day-to-day management responsibility? So if you think about that, right, there's some element of, okay, they've got to understand the basic framework of how like the constitutional system works and obviously what the rights and responsibilities are of the executive branch relative to the other branches. Two is, we want to make sure they had a deep kind of regulatory understanding again of kind of how the rulemaking process works, because these things are obviously, an important mechanism by which we can affect policy in the organization. I would say the other big area that we wanted to spend more time on, which was less developed in the last areas, was around kind of people management skills, performance management. I think you and I talked about this previously, Drew. We have, unfortunately, a culture so far in terms of performance management in the government that has not really done a good job of differentiating true outstanding performance, and then also in many cases, holding accountable people who are not able to do the jobs we need to do. And so we wanted to kind of really give them a refresher in a sense of kind of at least what we expect of senior leaders in the organization. And then the last area, I'll call it leadership for lack of a better word, which is a little bit obviously can be a soft subject, but there were things like, for example, some sense of kind of financial skills, financial planning, thinking about headcount planning, stuff that again is not, through no fault of their own, was never really a core part of kind of what we thought of and what we expected in the SES job. And certainly, as in this administration, as you well know, we think about kind of making efficiency a first-class citizen in government. We wanted to make sure that we also had some training geared towards those elements as well.
So I know that there's also two different training programs that you all are rolling out. Can you talk about maybe the difference between them? Is one better suited for certain types of executives, or how should employees be figuring out which is right for them?
Yeah. So I think the best thing to do is obviously people should go through the actual like curriculum that's kind of been published on them so they can understand it. I think they kind of build on one another though, basically. So look, in the perfect world, we would have all SESs, go through both programs, quite frankly. Sometimes that could be just time and cost prohibitive. So we thought we'd at least break it up in a way that was most accessible for the maximum number of people.
And one of the programs talks in part about, offering some training on President Trump's executive orders and other executive branch priorities. Can
Yeah.
you talk a little bit more specifically about what that type of training is going to entail?
Yeah. So as the president believes very strongly, as do those of us in the administration, that ultimately, kind of what the president affects through executive orders really reflects, the administration's priorities in terms of policymaking. And so part of what we wanted to do was take people through that process, help them understand it, help them understand how we go from an executive order to the implementation of that order. But some of the things, again, that you and I have talked about, things like merit hiring, for example, is a very important concept in terms of reshaping the federal workforce. And so we want to make sure people understand the principles behind the merit hiring process, again, performance management. So things that basically are kind of within the bailiwick of what we expect managers to do that are now represented in the form of executive orders. We want to make sure people really do understand both the derivation of those as well as kind of how we think about the appropriate implementation of those policies.
Thank you. And then just a question about the actual development of these training programs. You mentioned that the Federal Executive Institute, for example, was taken down earlier this year. I know there was also OPM previously had a Center for Leadership Development that was partially had a reduction in force occur there. So who was really involved in the development of these products, and for example, were there contractors are involved, or how did this really get up and started?
Yeah, so this was driven mostly internal to OPM, a group called HRS, our Human Resources Services Group, which is again where the other leadership development training programs existed. I would say, in many respects, we bootstrapped this in the sense that we looked for experts either within government or outside of government that we could bring in. And so, as you may have seen, I don't know if you've been through it at all, but a lot of the training is kind of conversations that are happening between people who've led different organizations on different topics, so that it's again very kind of hopefully very hands-on, practically oriented, as opposed to some like academic theories of how management should be done. And then the other thing I would just add, just so your viewers have a sense, is look, there's a lot more that can be done, and there's no OPM doesn't have this view that look, we need to own and develop everything. So I think there are conversations that we're just starting now, but there's plenty of organizations external to OPM who, to the extent they have kind of ways in which they can help us further develop the curriculum, we're very, very open to that. So really the main goals here are making sure the curriculum reflects, again, what we expect of the SES, and then importantly, look, efficiency and making sure people have both the cost is not prohibitive as well as people have the time to do things. Those are the main goals. So to the extent third parties can help us do that, we're very, very open to that.
So you do imagine that this is going to have, multiple iterations over time. I mean,
Absolutely.
for example, if you have training on technology or cybersecurity or something like that, that can easily very quickly become outdated. So is this going to be something where you're going to have the content continually being refreshed?
Absolutely. Yeah. Look, I think the only way this is successful is, yeah, that the content has to be refreshed. And again, we will need, help from external parties to do that. The other thing we want to do, as you mentioned, right, obviously this was geared towards SES and kind of senior level executives. There's a much, much bigger opportunity in government, which, we have to figure out how we can do it again efficiently, which is there's, a whole set of, supervisory employees, kind of first line managers in government, where again, different skills are needed, but, you can think of it almost as like, when you become a manager for the first time, like what are the things that you really need to know and understand, right? So everything from like how do you do one-on-one meetings with employees, what does it mean to do performance management? How do you give feedback to employees? There's obviously, legal issues around, do you understand obviously anti-discrimination laws and things of that sort? So we're starting at the leadership level because obviously, number one, it's a more tractable problem in the sense that there's about, 7,500 roughly people at that leadership level. But, over time, one of the things that OPM, I think, can and should do a more exhaustive effort on is, as part of our reshaping of the federal workforce, is look, if we expect people to do performance management, or we expect them to do merit hiring, or we expect managers to think about career development for their employees, those are things that, some people naturally know how to do that, but a lot of people don't. And a lot of people get promoted from individual contributor roles into manager roles. And I think there's a real opportunity for us to kind of just rethink and reshape how we think about kind of training the next generation of managers that are both there today as well as that are, hopefully up and coming in the organization.
I know that the trainings are also, according to some of the guidance that OPM has released on this, they're going to include, sections on the updated executive core qualifications or ECQs for the
Yep.
SES. And I know that OPM updated those a little bit earlier this year. So is that, can you talk about more like the decision behind updating those ECQs initially and how that is feeding into the training here as well?
Yeah. So again, I think of the ECQs in many ways as very closely related to, in the environment we're trying to create, like what do we expect of an SES, right? Because at the end of the day, look, ECQs are things against which the SES are going to be evaluated as we think about their own performance evaluations. And so, yeah, I would say like a big area, for example, that, we historically had not spent so much time on, and we still have a lot more work to do is, concepts of efficiency or return on investment, or how do you think about business planning, or how do you think about headcount planning, right? Things that now, at least in this administration, we expect if you're at the most senior levels of management that you should be thinking about those things. Utilizing technology obviously is a way to increase efficiency in the organization, right? So helping people understand those goals as well. So that's really kind of the way I think about it is if we've got a mismatch between how we're going to evaluate people and what we're training them on, to be fair, it's I just don't think it's a very fair situation to put people in. So we've got to be clear on what our expectations are. We have to make sure people have the tool sets to be able to work against that. And then I think it's totally reasonable for us to hold them accountable as part of kind of the broader performance management culture that we're instituting in government.
And you mentioned that these are maybe some of the first trainings that you have developed, but can you talk about, other ones that might be coming down the pipeline? Are there going to be ones for other groups of federal employees you envision happening at some point in the future?
Yeah, as I said, like for me personally, and we have not instituted this yet, so this is me talking as opposed to if my team hears about this through this, they may this may be the first time they're hearing about it, but I really want to focus on kind of working through kind of the different levels of managers in government, and again, figuring out like the foundational elements that we need. So again, no surprise to you given the conversations we've had, but if we're going to think about merit hiring as obviously a fundamental principle for this administration, and we think about, increased accountability and differentiation among performance management, objective setting. So I'll just give you an example, right? So, one of the challenges that I see as we're now going through, we're in the cycle where we're doing performance management, for people since we just, crossed the year end. We have situations where the objectives that individual contributors in an organization were given don't necessarily tie into and roll up to the overall objectives of the SES overseeing that person. And again, this is not an indictment of anybody. It's just kind of, it is what it is. But, the honest answer is in some cases, maybe we've done a poor job of training people on that, helping them understand it. So those are kind of the foundational things that I'd really like for us to work on. Then there's always going to be, as you can imagine, right, within this HRS group, there's like, always going to be training and career development opportunities that are very specific to an agency. Those will tend to be done kind of in conjunction with the agency, and many of those will be done on a kind of fee for service, essentially project basis. But I think really where OPM can hopefully take the lead here is things that have broad centralized kind of exposure, independent of kind of vertical or agency specific trainings that actually of course need to happen in parallel.
One other consideration that I think agencies are going to have to make with this, and you alluded to this a little bit earlier, is budget and the cost of the
Yeah,
trainings.
yeah,
Of course, we have most agencies, and maybe you don't have a straightforward answer on how to approach this, but obviously most agencies right now are under a continuing resolution, and we don't really know what the budget's going to look like
yeah.
for the next cycle. So, based on that, how much uptake are you kind of hoping for or expecting with this?
Yeah. So, as I said, the good news on this one is, we've gone from basically roughly in the old training session, it was about $7,500 per person in terms of training is what it cost. Now, at the new program we've rolled out, it'll be about $1,200 per person. So number one, we've, kind of roughly by a factor of 5 or 6 reduced the kind of per head cost for employees. So I think that'll help a lot. Look, you're absolutely right about continuing resolution. If I had something brilliant to say on that one, I would tell you. Unfortunately, look, I don't know. Obviously, our friends down the street here in Congress will ultimately determine what makes most sense. But what we do have is we've got very strong support from OMB, who, as you know, obviously is really kind of works very closely with every agency on their budgets. And OMB has encouraged people, as they're building their plans for this year and next year, to make sure that training is a component of that. One of the things that I had a post on today, which is broad headcount planning exercise that we've asked the agencies to do in conjunction with us, with OMB and OPM. And in addition to, kind of all the things we care about in terms of where they're investing their resources, is there are administration priorities that we've asked them to focus on and make sure that they talk to us about. One of which certainly is the merit hiring plan and how they'll incorporate that. They're hiring. 2 is a focus on, what we're calling kind of early career. So, people who are, have lesser work experience, because we do have a challenging demographic, problem in government where we're not replenishing kind of the pipeline of new hires of people starting their career at the same rate, obviously, as we have people who will be, retiring over the next, 5 to 10 years. And then training is another one of those objectives. So what we hope to see, again, as part of those staffing plans is, number one, hopefully given the price point that, this is a relatively small amount of people's budgets that they can then account for as they go through their overall planning exercise.
And at the end of the day here, what are you really hoping that senior executives are going to take out of these trainings? What do you think could be the benefit of them at the end of the day?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it's, to me, it's very simple, which is, look, we ought to have, executives who are extremely well rounded in everything that's critical to, success in their roles, which is, do they have, a grounding in, objective setting, headcount planning, thinking about trade-offs with technology, thinking about how to kind of understand, do I take this investment or not? Obviously, organizational structure is a big piece of this, right? Since we've been through a lot of organizational restructuring. Performance management is a big piece. So I think of it as, again, we you know we're trying to move towards a performance-based culture in government, and I think it's only fair if we're going to do that, that we give people the tools and the training necessary so that they understand very clearly what they're held accountable to. And then I think now we have the mechanism ultimately to, as part of their performance review, make sure that they are adhering to those principles.
Great. Well, Director Cooper, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Scott Cooper is Director of the Office of Personnel Management, and I'm Drew Friedman, a reporter with Federal News Network. Thank you so much.